Hey everybody, welcome to Pastor Have You Seen This? A production of Allen Creek Community Church. My name is Rick Thiessen. I am the senior pastor here at Allen Creek Church. And this is just a little segment we do where you send in internet content and I haven't seen this before, and then I just kind of give you my take on it. It's cold take, so grace please, because I'm just making this up on the fly. But hopefully from my raw thoughts, maybe something strikes you as interesting or compelling about a Christian response to stuff that makes the rounds. And by the way, if you want to send in something to get Rick or Alex's response, send it to this address right here, social@ac3.org. We'd be happy to respond to it. Hey, like and subscribe or comment, and then we can get a conversation going, because maybe there's some stuff that you just disagree with what I say totally. So that's fine. Let's get a conversation going on this.
Ideas.
I don't.
It's wife burning.
Wife burning?
Wife burning.
Burning your wife alive?
Sati.
Yes, it's an old Hindu awful practice. My favorite statue in London. I was out for a run one morning. It was in Trafalgar Square. Over in the corner is Charles Napier. So I looked into Charles Napier, and sure enough, he'd been a battlefield commander for the Duke of Wellington, helped deliver the victory at Waterloo against the French, and then he shipped off to India, and he's going to be the governor of one of the 4 trading colonies. They called them presidencies. I think it was in Calcutta. And as he's getting there, he arrives, and the locals are building this funeral pyre in the center of the city. He goes, "What's this?" And they said, yes, you must respect our tradition. This Indian noble has died, and tomorrow we're going to burn his wife. She was alive. He said, "Come back tomorrow." So that night, he had his East India Company forces erect a gallows surrounding that funeral pyre. He said, "I will respect your culture, and you will respect ours.
Oh,
In
wow.
our culture, if you burn a woman, you're a murderer, and I'll hang every one of you if you touch her. No more Sati."
Amazing.
You want Sati?
Wow. Okay. Well, and this is I'm not sure about some of the historical detail about this particular English general or admiral, whatever he was, but I'm up to speed on Sati. So a lot is made of the damage of colonialism, right? And this is where you get into, if you're a cultural relativist, so you believe that all cultures are the same and that one culture's practices is no different than another culture's practice, and ironically, the Indian that, this guy talks to, the English guy talks to, sort of marshals almost like the cultural relativism defense in defense of wife burning. And, so, it wasn't as much of a thing then as it is now, which is that, if there is no moral absolutes, then one cultural practice is no more or less moral than another cultural practice. But of course, that grates against a couple things. One is our Western sensibilities, because we have very different cultural practices. But B, it grates against the moral law of God. We believe as Christians that God has made us inherently in His image, and therefore there is a conscience that rails against something as hideous as this idea of wife burning. We can probably understand at least somewhat of the defense of the cultural practice that a wife's devotion to her husband needed to be so complete, and his ownership of her needed to be so complete that for another man to have her, it would be a terrible dishonoring of the dead man. And so in order to avoid dishonoring a dead man by having his wife be remarried to somebody else, she just gets to die with him, right? So you can see where it sort of originated in the supremacy of men and the idea of their honor, right? Even dead men have honor. And you can see that in Scripture as well, biblical Scripture. But this you don't see. And so this puts in front of us the way we think about cultures and about cultural practices and norms and traditions. Are they completely relative? In which case, why do you rail against Sati if you do? Do you have a reason for that other than just it doesn't match your particular cultural proclivities and interests and norms? Or is Sati a violation of God's objective standard, which stands above all cultures, including the West, including America, England, whatever, and judges them according to an objective standard that stands above them all? And it judges Sati as being evil in the same way that it would have judged the excesses of colonialism as evil. And what would be those? Well, non-representative government, or the imposition of economic realities where the colonialized lose agency and all that kind of stuff. So we could talk about colonialism in another video, but the point is there an objective standard that judges cultures or not? And if there's not, then you don't have a right, if you stand outside the Christian faith, to judge Sati as being evil or abhorrent. Not really. It's just another cultural practice that has its foundations in cultural norms that have their own foundations in the preservation of the race, which has its foundations in evolution, which has its origins in, chemistry, basically. It boils down to just basically the action of atoms. So you can't rescue moral indignation out of that kind of worldview. But you can in a Christian worldview. Another great example of this is the practice of female circumcision. I know of a hard Western atheist thinker who was an anthropologist, and he dealt a lot with cultures in Northern Africa, and almost all of them practiced female circumcision. And he struggled with cognitive dissonance because he knew, according to his own atheistic worldview, that these cultural practices were evil. But no, sorry. What I mean to say is, according to his worldview, these cultural practices were just cultural practices. But somewhere beyond his secular thinking about the relativity of cultures and their norms and the relativity of ethics, he just knew this was a violation of the rights of people who are precious, who are ends in and of themselves. But of course, that only plays in a Christian worldview where people are made in the image of God. That's why that one line from the Bible, from Genesis chapter 1:27, is so seminal. If you need to read a great book on this, there's a great book by, and now it escapes me. We're going to put it in the description below, that will kind of talk about how the Christian worldview changed the ballgame when it came to what we think of as normal in terms of our ethical framework. And I think that points to a God, the God of Scripture, who is true and good and beautiful. And so, yeah, we can rail against the excesses of colonialism, and we should. But see, sometimes we do so much, we don't see what the colonialists, meaning generally the Christian Europeans who were the colonialists, what they did that we would now consider to be righteous, which was the stopping of the hideous practice of female circumcision and the burning of wives on funeral pyres of their husbands. So, is there an objective standard above such practice or not? And that's something you have to decide. And I've sided with the idea that there is a lawgiver, there's a law above human laws, and that it comes from a good God. And yeah, different cultures agree with this law and disagree with this law at several different points. And our job is to surrender ourselves to that lawgiver and find his good way in the middle of our broken cultures. All right, so there's my take on this particular video. If you got another one you want us to comment on, send it to social@ac3.org. And until next time, see you here on Pastor, Have You Seen This?